The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Davidson as 12-year-old Emma Martinez walked through the main gate beside her father, Colonel Martinez. Her small frame was almost swallowed by the oversized camouflage uniform she wore, a miniature version of what the soldiers around her had on. The uniform had been a gift from her father, and she wore it with the same pride that he wore his decorated dress blues. Emma had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their time with dolls and video games, she preferred to be outdoors, learning about survival skills and studying military history. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of famous military leaders and maps of historical battles. She knew the specifications of every rifle used by the U.S. Army and could recite military protocols that even some junior soldiers struggled to remember. Today was special. It was Bring Your Child to Work Day at Fort Davidson, and Emma had been looking forward to this for months. She had spent weeks preparing her uniform, making sure every button was polished and every crease was sharp. Her father had taught her how to properly wear military gear, and she took great pride in getting every detail right. As they walked past the barracks, Emma noticed a group of sergeants gathered near the training grounds. They were preparing equipment for the day's shooting exercises. Emma's eyes lit up when she saw the various rifles and targets being set up. She had been learning to shoot at her local gun club for the past 2 years, and her instructor often praised her natural talent and steady hands. Sergeant Mitchell was the first to notice the small figure in camouflage walking beside Colonel Martinez. He nudged his fellow sergeants, Sergeant Thompson and Sergeant Rodriguez, and pointed in Emma's direction. The 3 men had been working together for several years and had developed a close friendship built on shared military experiences and their love of practical jokes. "Would you look at that?" Sergeant Mitchell said with a smirk. "We've got ourselves a little soldier today." Sergeant Thompson chuckled as he watched Emma trying to match her father's military stride. "That uniform is almost bigger than she is. Looks like she's playing dress-up." Sergeant Rodriguez shook his head in amusement. "Kids these days think being in the military is all about looking tough in a uniform. They have no idea what real military life is about." As Emma and her father approached, the sergeant straightened up and saluted Colonel Martinez. He returned their salute and introduced Emma to the group. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter Emma. She's here for the special day we organized for military families. I hope you'll help show her what life on base is really like." Emma stood at attention and gave a small but proper salute to each sergeant. Her form was surprisingly good for someone her age, showing that she had been practicing military customs. However, the sergeants were more focused on how out of place she looked than on her actual knowledge or skills. "Nice uniform, little lady," Sergeant Mitchell said in a tone that adults often use when talking to small children. "Did you pick that out all by yourself?" Emma's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, sir. My father helped me learn how to wear it properly. Every piece of equipment has its place and purpose." Sergeant Thompson suppressed a laugh. "Equipment? That's a pretty big word. Do you even know what all those pockets are for?" Without hesitation, Emma began pointing to different parts of her uniform. "This pocket holds field rations. This one is for medical supplies. This attachment point is for a radio, and this area is designed to hold extra ammunition magazines." She continued, describing each element with remarkable accuracy. The sergeants exchanged glances. They were slightly surprised by her knowledge, but they still saw her as just a little girl playing soldier. Their years of combat experience and military training made them feel that no child could truly understand the serious nature of military service. "That's very nice, sweetheart," Sergeant Rodriguez said in a patronizing voice. "But knowing about gear and actually using it are 2 very different things. The military isn't a game." Emma's father noticed the tension building and decided to intervene. "Emma has actually been learning quite a bit about military history and tactics. She's been taking shooting lessons at the civilian gun club, and her instructor says she has remarkable natural ability." This comment made the sergeants even more skeptical. They had seen many civilians who thought they could shoot, only to discover that shooting under pressure in real conditions was completely different from target practice in a controlled environment. "Shooting lessons?" Sergeant Mitchell said with obvious doubt. Well, that's nice for a hobby, but military shooting is a different beast altogether. It takes years of training to become proficient with military weapons. Sergeant Thompson nodded in agreement. We've been training soldiers for over a decade each. Most recruits can barely hit the broadside of a barn when they first arrive. It takes months of intensive practice before they can qualify on their weapons. Emma listened to their comments without saying anything, but her jaw tightened slightly. She was used to people underestimating her because of her age and size. At school, teachers often assumed she wasn't capable of understanding advanced concepts. At the gun club, new members frequently made jokes about a little girl trying to handle firearms. But Emma had learned to let her actions speak louder than words. Colonel Martinez could see that his daughter was becoming frustrated, but he also knew that she was strong enough to handle the situation. He had raised her to be independent and confident, even when faced with doubt from others. Why don't we continue the tour? Colonel Martinez suggested. Emma was particularly interested in seeing the shooting range and learning about military training exercises. As they walked toward the range, the sergeants continued their quiet commentary about Emma's appearance and their doubts about her abilities. They weren't trying to be mean-spirited, but their military experience had taught them that combat skills required physical strength, mental toughness, and years of dedicated training. The shooting range at Fort Davidson was an impressive facility. It had targets at various distances, from close-range pistol practice to long-distance rifle shooting. The range was equipped with the latest safety equipment and featured multiple firing positions to simulate different combat scenarios. Emma's eyes widened as she took in the sight. She had never seen such an advanced shooting facility. Her civilian gun club was nice, but this was on a completely different level. She could see targets positioned at distances that would challenge even experienced marksmen. This is where we train our soldiers, Sergeant Mitchell explained, his voice taking on a more professional tone as he described the facility. Every soldier must qualify on multiple weapon systems. It's not just about being able to hit a target. You have to be able to shoot accurately under stress, in different weather conditions, and from various positions. Emma listened intently, absorbing every detail. She noticed how the range was organized, where the safety equipment was located, and how the targets were positioned to create realistic training scenarios. What's the longest distance target? Emma asked. Sergeant Rodriguez pointed to a target barely visible in the distance. That one is at 800 yards. Only our best marksmen can hit that consistently. Most soldiers never even attempt shots at that distance. Emma studied the distant target carefully. She had been practicing at distances up to 400 yards at her gun club, but 800 yards was significantly farther than anything she had tried before. Have you ever hit a target at that distance? Emma asked Sergeant Mitchell. The sergeant smiled confidently. A few times. But I've been shooting for 15 years. It takes tremendous skill, perfect equipment, and ideal conditions to make shots like that. As they continued the tour, Emma noticed more soldiers arriving at the range for their scheduled training exercises. Some were experienced veterans, while others appeared to be newer recruits. She watched how they handled their weapons and observed their shooting techniques. One young soldier, probably just out of basic training, was struggling with his rifle. His shots were scattered across the target, and he was becoming increasingly frustrated with his performance. His sergeant was trying to help him adjust his stance and breathing technique. Military shooting isn't just about having good eyesight, Sergeant Thompson explained to Emma. You have to control your breathing, manage stress, and maintain focus even when there are distractions all around you. In real combat situations, there might be explosions, gunfire, and chaos happening while you're trying to take a precise shot. Emma nodded thoughtfully. She had read about combat situations in her military history books, but hearing about it from someone with actual experience was different. She began to understand why the sergeants were skeptical about civilian shooting skills compared to military training. However, she also noticed that some of the basic principles they were describing were the same techniques she had been learning at her gun club. Her instructor, a former Marine, had taught her about breathing control, proper stance, and mental focus. He had also emphasized the importance of staying calm under pressure. As the morning progressed, Emma watched various soldiers practice their shooting skills. She observed their techniques and mentally compared them to what she had learned. Some of the soldiers were excellent marksmen, hitting their targets with impressive accuracy. Others struggled with basic fundamentals that Emma had already mastered. The sergeants continued to make occasional comments about her uniform and her presence at the range, but their tone was becoming less mocking and more simply dismissive. They still didn't take her seriously as someone who might have actual shooting skills. Around lunchtime, Colonel Martinez was called away to attend to an urgent matter that required his immediate attention. He asked the sergeants if they would continue showing Emma around the base until he could return. "Of course, sir," Sergeant Mitchell replied. "We'll take good care of her." After Colonel Martinez left, the dynamic changed slightly. The sergeants felt more free to express their opinions about having a child at the training facility. "This isn't really the place for kids," Sergeant Rodriguez said, not unkindly but firmly. "Military training is serious business. People could get hurt if they don't follow proper procedures." Emma listened quietly, but she was becoming more determined to prove that she belonged there. She had spent years preparing for this opportunity, and she wasn't going to let their doubts discourage her from learning everything she could about military operations. The afternoon heat was beginning to settle over Fort Davidson as Emma continued her tour with the three sergeants. Without her father present, she felt more pressure to prove herself, but she also felt more freedom to speak her mind. The morning's comments about her uniform and abilities had been bothering her more than she wanted to admit. As they walked past the equipment storage building, Sergeant Thompson decided to test Emma's knowledge further. He had been in the military for 12 years and prided himself on knowing every piece of equipment inside and out. "Since you seem to know so much about military gear," he said, pointing to a complex-looking device mounted on a tripod, "what do you think that is?" Emma studied the equipment carefully. She recognized it from her military reference books and online research. "That's an M240 machine gun mounted on a tripod system. It fires 7.62 mm ammunition and has an effective range of about 1,200 meters. The tripod provides stability for sustained fire and can be adjusted for elevation and windage." The three sergeants stopped walking and stared at her. Most civilians, and even many new recruits, wouldn't have been able to identify the weapon so quickly or provide such detailed specifications. "Lucky guess," Sergeant Mitchell muttered, but there was less certainty in his voice than before. They continued walking, and Emma noticed a group of soldiers practicing field maneuvers. Noting how they communicated with hand signals and coordinated their positions. Her father had taught her some basic tactical concepts, and she had studied military strategy extensively on her own. "Those soldiers are using a bounding overwatch technique," Emma observed quietly. "One team provides covering fire while the other advances, then they switch roles. It's designed to maintain constant pressure on an enemy position while minimizing exposure to return fire." Sergeant Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Where did you learn about tactical movements?" "I read about them," Emma replied simply. "My father has books about military strategy, and I've studied famous battles throughout history. I find it interesting how tactics have evolved with new technology." The sergeants were beginning to realize that Emma wasn't just a little girl playing dress-up. Her knowledge was surprisingly comprehensive and accurate. However, they still maintained their belief that book learning was very different from practical experience. As they approached the mess hall for lunch, Emma spotted something that made her heart race with excitement. Posted on a bulletin board was a notice about an upcoming shooting competition open to all base personnel. The competition would include multiple categories and distances, with prizes for the top performers in each division. "What's this competition about?" Emma asked, pointing to the notice. Sergeant Mitchell read over her shoulder. "Oh, that's our monthly marksmanship competition. Soldiers from different units compete to see who the best shots are. It's pretty serious stuff. Only experienced marksmen usually place in the top rankings." Emma studied the details of the competition. There were categories for different weapons and distances, including some that matched what she had been practicing at her civilian gun club. Her pulse quickened as she imagined the possibility of participating. "Could a civilian participate?" she asked casually. Sergeant Thompson laughed. "Technically, yes. But civilians need special permission and have to meet certain safety requirements. Plus, they'd be competing against soldiers who train with these weapons every day. Most civilians wouldn't want to embarrass themselves like that." Emma didn't respond, but she filed away the information for later consideration. During lunch in the mess hall, Emma sat with the sergeants and listened to their stories about military life. Despite their initial skepticism about her presence, they were beginning to warm up to her genuine interest in military matters. She asked thoughtful questions about their experiences and showed real respect for their service. "You know," Sergeant Rodriguez said, between bites of his sandwich, "most kids your age are more interested in video games and social media than military history. What got you interested in all this?" Emma considered the question carefully. "My father always told me stories about military heroes and the sacrifices people make to protect others. I think it's important work. Also, I like the discipline and precision required. Everything has a purpose and follows logical principles." Sergeant Mitchell nodded slowly. "That's a mature way to look at it. But you understand that real military life isn't like what you see in movies, right? It's a lot of hard work, following orders, and dealing with difficult situations." "I know," Emma replied. "That's part of what I respect about it. Anyone can do something when it's easy. It takes real character to do the right thing when it's difficult." The sergeants exchanged glances across the table. This 12-year-old girl was speaking with wisdom beyond her years, and her understanding of military values seemed genuine rather than romanticized. After lunch, they returned to the shooting range, where afternoon training exercises were beginning. Emma watched as different groups of soldiers practiced with various weapons systems. She paid particular attention to their techniques and tried to learn from observing their methods. One group was working with M16 rifles at medium-range targets. Emma noticed that several soldiers were struggling with their accuracy, particularly when shooting from standing positions. She observed their breathing patterns, stance, and trigger control, comparing what she saw to the techniques she had learned from her instructor. "See that soldier over there?" Sergeant Thompson pointed to a young man who was having trouble hitting his target. "He's been practicing for 3 weeks, but he still can't shoot consistently. Military rifles are different from civilian guns. They require different techniques and have different characteristics." Emma watched the struggling soldier for several minutes. She could see several issues with his technique that were causing his poor accuracy. His breathing wasn't controlled, his stance was too tense, and he was jerking the trigger instead of pulling it smoothly. "What do you think his problem is?" Sergeant Mitchell asked Emma, deciding to test her observational skills. "He's not controlling his breathing properly," Emma said, after watching for another moment. "He's shooting at different points in his respiratory cycle, which is throwing off his consistency. Also, his grip is too tight, which is causing him to shake, and he's pulling the trigger instead of squeezing it straight back." The sergeants looked at the soldier Emma was describing, then back at her. Her analysis was completely accurate. Those were exactly the issues that the range instructor had been trying to help the soldier correct. "That's actually right," Sergeant Rodriguez admitted reluctantly. "But knowing what's wrong and fixing it are different things. It takes lots of practice to develop proper shooting habits." As the afternoon progressed, Emma continued to observe the various training exercises. She watched soldiers practice rapid-fire drills, precision shooting, and shooting from different positions. Each time, she analyzed their techniques and compared them to what she had learned. Around 3 o'clock, Colonel Martinez returned from his meeting and found the group at the shooting range. He immediately noticed that the atmosphere had changed since the morning. The sergeants were no longer making jokes about Emma's appearance, and they seemed to be taking her questions more seriously. "How has the tour been going?" Colonel Martinez asked. "Your daughter knows quite a bit about military equipment and tactics," Sergeant Mitchell replied, his tone much more respectful than it had been in the morning. "She's been asking very insightful questions." Emma felt a surge of pride at the sergeant's words, but she tried not to show it. She had worked hard to earn their respect, and it felt good to be recognized for her knowledge and dedication. Emma has always been interested in military matters, Colonel Martinez said with obvious pride. She spends hours studying military history and learning about different aspects of military life. As they talked, Emma noticed that the shooting range was being prepared for some kind of special demonstration. Targets were being placed at various distances, and different types of rifles were being set up at multiple firing positions. "What's happening over there?" Emma asked. Sergeant Thompson checked his watch. "Oh, that's the weekly marksmanship demonstration. Some of our best shooters show off their skills for visiting officials and family members. It's pretty impressive to watch." Emma's eyes lit up with interest. This was exactly the kind of thing she had hoped to see during her visit to the base. She had read about military marksmanship standards, but she had never seen elite military shooters in action. As they moved closer to watch the demonstration, Emma noticed that the targets were positioned at distances ranging from 100 yards to over 600 yards. Some targets were standard bullseye designs, while others were silhouettes designed to simulate combat scenarios. The first shooter was a staff sergeant who specialized in long-range precision shooting. He approached a rifle that Emma recognized as an M24 sniper system. The sergeant took his time setting up his shot, adjusting his position and checking his scope settings. When he fired, the shot hit the 400-yard target dead center. A small cheer went up from the gathered spectators, including several family members who had come to watch the demonstration. "That's Sergeant Williams," Sergeant Rodriguez explained to Emma. "He's one of our best long-range shooters. He can hit targets at distances that most people couldn't even see clearly." Emma watched intently as Sergeant Williams continued his demonstration, hitting targets at 500 and 600 yards with remarkable consistency. His technique was flawless, and his concentration was absolute. This was the level of skill that she aspired to reach. The next demonstration involved rapid-fire shooting with an M16 rifle. The shooter had to hit multiple targets in quick succession, simulating a combat scenario where speed and accuracy were both critical. As Emma watched the various demonstrations, she felt a mixture of inspiration and frustration. She was impressed by the skill level of the military marksman, but she also believed that her own abilities were better than the sergeants gave her credit for. She had been shooting regularly for 2 years, and her civilian instructor had consistently praised her natural talent and rapid improvement. "This is incredible," Emma said to Sergeant Mitchell. "How long did it take these soldiers to reach this level of skill?" "Sergeant Williams has been shooting competitively for about 8 years, Sergeant Mitchell replied. "The rapid-fire specialist has been training for about 6 years. It takes a long time to develop that kind of precision and consistency." Emma nodded thoughtfully. But privately, she wondered if the sergeants would be surprised by what she could do if given the chance to demonstrate her skills. She had been thinking about the shooting competition notice she had seen earlier, and an idea was beginning to form in her mind. As the demonstration continued, Emma noticed that some of the techniques being used were very similar to what she had learned at her gun club. The fundamental principles of marksmanship were the same, whether in civilian or military settings. The main differences were the specific equipment used and the advanced tactical applications. "Could I try shooting one of the rifles?" Emma asked during a lull in the demonstrations. The 3 sergeants looked at each other uncertainly. They had been impressed by Emma's knowledge, but actually allowing her to handle military weapons was a different matter entirely. "That would require special permission and safety protocols," Sergeant Rodriguez said carefully. "Military weapons are different from civilian guns, and there are strict regulations about who can use them." Emma tried to hide her disappointment, but she understood the safety concerns. Military bases had to follow strict rules about weapons handling, especially when civilians and children were present. However, her desire to prove herself was growing stronger by the minute. She had spent months preparing for this day, and she felt like she was being judged based on her age and appearance rather than her actual abilities. The respectful tone the sergeants were now using was better than the morning's mockery, but she still felt like they saw her as just an unusually knowledgeable child rather than someone with real potential. The late afternoon sun was casting golden light across the shooting range when an unexpected opportunity presented itself. A visiting general had arrived at Fort Davidson for an unscheduled inspection, and word quickly spread that he wanted to observe the marksmanship capabilities of the base personnel. General Harrison was known throughout the military for his exceptional shooting skills and his interest in discovering new talent. He had served in multiple combat deployments and held several military shooting records. When he heard about the ongoing demonstrations, he decided to make an impromptu visit to the range. Emma watched with fascination as the general arrived with his small entourage. He was an imposing figure, with decades of experience etched into his weathered face. She could tell immediately that this was someone who commanded genuine respect from everyone around him. General Harrison. Colonel Martinez approached and saluted. "This is an unexpected honor, sir." "At ease, Colonel," the general replied, returning the salute. "I heard you have some excellent marksmen here. I'd like to see what your soldiers can do." The general's arrival caused a stir throughout the range. Soldiers who had been casually watching the demonstrations suddenly stood at attention. The atmosphere became much more formal and intense. Emma found herself standing next to her father as the general began reviewing the shooting demonstrations. She noticed how even the experienced sergeants seemed nervous in the presence of such a high-ranking officer. "Who's that young lady?" General Harrison asked, noticing Emma's military uniform. "My daughter, sir," Colonel Martinez replied. "She's here for our Family Day program. She has a strong interest in military matters." The general looked at Emma with curiosity. "Impressive uniform, young lady. Do you know what all those markings represent?" Emma stood at attention and began explaining each element of her uniform, from the insignia to the purpose of each piece of equipment. Her knowledge was detailed and accurate, clearly demonstrating that she understood the significance of what she was wearing. General Harrison nodded approvingly. "Excellent. It's good to see young people who understand and respect military traditions." As they talked, Sergeant Mitchell approached the general with an update about the scheduled demonstrations. "Sir, we have several marksmen ready to demonstrate various shooting techniques and distances." "Very good," the general replied. "But first, let me see your most challenging target. I want to know what your soldiers are capable of at maximum range." Sergeant Mitchell pointed to the 800-yard target that had been set up earlier. "That's our longest distance target, sir. Only our very best marksmen can hit it consistently." General Harrison studied the distant target through a pair of binoculars. The target appeared as just a small speck against the far hillside. Even with magnification, it was difficult to make out the details of the target face. "Challenging indeed," the general mused. "Let's see who can hit that target today." 3 of the base's best marksmen were called forward to attempt shots at the 800-yard target. Emma watched intently as each soldier prepared for their shot. The first 2 managed to hit the target, but their shots were not well centered. The third soldier missed entirely, his bullet striking the dirt several feet to the left of the target. General Harrison observed each attempt carefully, making notes about the soldiers' techniques and results. He seemed pleased with the overall performance, but Emma could tell he was hoping to see something more impressive. "Decent shooting," the general commented. "But in combat situations, decent isn't always good enough. Precision at long range can mean the difference between mission success and failure." As the demonstration continued, Emma noticed that a civilian rifle, similar to the one she used at her gun club, had been set up at one of the firing positions. It wasn't military equipment, but rather a high-quality hunting rifle that someone had brought for comparison purposes. An idea suddenly occurred to Emma, but she hesitated to voice it. The thought of asking to participate seemed presumptuous, especially with a general present. However, her desire to prove herself was overwhelming her natural caution. During a brief pause in the demonstrations, Emma approached her father quietly. "Dad, could I ask the general if I could try shooting at the long-range target?" Colonel Martinez looked surprised by the request. "Emma, that's a very difficult shot. Even experienced soldiers struggle with that distance." "I know," Emma replied, "but I've been practicing at 400 yards consistently, and my instructor thinks I'm ready for longer distances. I'd really like to try." Colonel Martinez considered his daughter's request carefully. He knew about her shooting abilities from reports he had received from her civilian instructor. He also knew that she had been training seriously and showing remarkable progress. However, attempting such a shot in front of a general and experienced military marksman was a significant risk. "If I give you permission to ask, you have to promise me that you'll be gracious, regardless of the result," Colonel Martinez said. "Missing the target wouldn't be embarrassing. Many experienced soldiers miss that shot." Emma nodded earnestly. "I understand, Dad. I just want the chance to try." Colonel Martinez approached General Harrison and explained that his daughter had been receiving shooting instruction and wondered if she might be allowed to attempt a shot with the civilian rifle. The general looked surprised by the request. "How old is she?" 12, sir," Colonel Martinez replied. "But she's been training seriously for 2 years, with a qualified instructor who speaks very highly of her abilities." General Harrison studied Emma thoughtfully. He had seen many young people who were interested in shooting, but few who had received serious training or showed genuine skill. "What kind of shooting has she been doing?" the general asked. "Precision rifle shooting at distances up to 400 yards, Colonel Martinez answered. Her instructor is a former Marine who emphasizes proper fundamentals and safety. The 3 sergeants who had been spending the day with Emma exchanged glances. They had been impressed by her knowledge, but they were still skeptical about her practical shooting abilities. The idea of a 12-year-old girl attempting an 800-yard shot seemed unrealistic. "Sir," Sergeant Mitchell interjected respectfully, "that's an extremely difficult shot. Most of our soldiers require months of training before they attempt targets at that distance." General Harrison considered the situation for a moment. "What do you think, young lady? Do you really want to try a shot that challenging?" Emma stepped forward and looked directly at the general. "Yes, sir. I understand it's difficult, but I'd like the opportunity to try my best." The general was impressed by her confident but respectful manner. "Very well. But you'll use the civilian rifle, and we'll have a range instructor supervise every step. Safety is paramount." A murmur went through the crowd of soldiers and family members who had gathered to watch. Word was spreading that a 12-year-old girl was going to attempt the 800-yard shot that had challenged even experienced marksmen. Emma felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she was led to the firing position. The civilian rifle was similar to what she was used to, but the scope and specific characteristics were slightly different. She took time to familiarize herself with the equipment, while the range instructor explained the safety procedures. "Take your time," the instructor said. "There's no pressure here. Just do your best and remember your fundamentals." Emma positioned herself behind the rifle and began her preparation routine. She adjusted the scope settings and checked the rifle's balance and feel. Through the scope, the 800-yard target looked impossibly small and distant. The crowd grew quiet as Emma settled into her shooting position. Even the skeptical sergeants found themselves curious to see what would happen. General Harrison watched through his binoculars, ready to observe her technique. Emma controlled her breathing and focused on the target. She remembered all the lessons her instructor had taught her about long-range shooting. Wind conditions, temperature, humidity, and even the curvature of the earth could affect a shot at this distance. She observed the wind flags positioned at intervals along the range. The wind was light but variable, changing direction slightly every few seconds. This was the kind of condition that made long-range shooting extremely challenging. For several minutes, Emma simply observed and prepared. She wanted to understand the conditions completely before attempting her shot. The crowd remained patient, recognizing that she was following proper long-range shooting procedures. Finally, Emma made her final adjustments and settled into her firing position. Her breathing became slow and controlled. Her focus narrowed until the only things that existed were herself, the rifle, and the distant target. The entire range fell silent. Even General Harrison lowered his binoculars to watch with his naked eyes. Soldiers who had been skeptical about a child's abilities found themselves holding their breath. Emma felt completely calm and focused. This was what she had been training for during countless hours at the gun club. All the practice sessions, all the instruction, and all the preparation had led to this moment. She aligned her sight picture perfectly, controlled her breathing, and applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. For a moment, everything was completely silent. Everyone strained to see the result, but the target was too far away to observe with naked eyes. The range instructor checked the target through a powerful spotting scope. His expression changed from casual observation to surprise, then to amazement. "Holy," he began, then caught himself in front of the general. "That's a perfect center hit. Dead center of the bullseye at 800 yards. The silence continued for another moment as people processed what they had just witnessed. Then General Harrison began applauding, and the entire crowd erupted in cheers and amazement. Sergeant Mitchell stared at the distant target through his binoculars, unable to believe what he was seeing. Sergeant Thompson and Sergeant Rodriguez stood with their mouths open, completely stunned by Emma's achievement. "Outstanding," General Harrison exclaimed as he approached Emma. "That was one of the finest long-range shots I've ever seen, regardless of the shooter's age or experience level." Emma remained calm despite the excitement around her. She carefully made the rifle safe and handed it back to the range instructor according to proper protocol. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir," she said to General Harrison. "I've been practicing for a long time, and I'm grateful that I was able to demonstrate what I've learned." The general was impressed not only by her shooting ability, but also by her composure and maturity in handling the attention. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My instructor at the Civilian Gun Club is a former Marine," Emma replied. "He taught me that shooting is about patience, discipline, and consistency. He always says that if you focus on proper fundamentals, the results will follow." General Harrison nodded approvingly. "Your instructor sounds like a wise man, and you've obviously been an excellent student." Colonel Martinez approached with obvious pride in his daughter's achievement. The three sergeants who had spent the day with Emma looked embarrassed about their earlier doubts and comments about her abilities. Sergeant Mitchell was the first to approach Emma. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I judged you based on your age and appearance instead of giving you credit for your actual knowledge and abilities. That shot was absolutely incredible." Sergeant Thompson and Sergeant Rodriguez echoed similar sentiments. They had learned an important lesson about making assumptions based on superficial characteristics. Emma accepted their apologies graciously. "Thank you, but I understand why you were skeptical. Most kids my age probably don't have serious shooting experience. I don't blame you for being surprised." General Harrison spent several more minutes talking with Emma about her training and her interest in military matters. He was impressed not only by her shooting ability, but also by her extensive knowledge of military history and tactics. "Young lady," the general said as he prepared to leave, "you have exceptional talent and dedication. With continued training and education, you could have a remarkable future in military service if that's something you choose to pursue." Emma thanked the general for his encouragement, but she remained humble about her achievement. "I just love the discipline and precision required in shooting. It's taught me a lot about focus and persistence." As the crowd began to disperse, Emma reflected on the events of the day. She had started the morning being mocked for her appearance and dismissed as a child playing dress-up. She was ending the day with the respect and admiration of experienced military personnel and a visiting general. The transformation in how people viewed her was remarkable, but Emma understood that the real value of the experience went beyond simply proving her abilities. She had learned important lessons about perseverance, maintaining dignity under pressure, and letting actions speak louder than words. Colonel Martinez put his arm around his daughter as they walked away from the range. "I'm proud of you, Emma. Not just for that incredible shot, but for how you handled yourself throughout the day." Emma smiled up at her father. "Thank you, Dad. This was the best day I've ever had." As they left Fort Davidson, Emma knew that this experience would stay with her forever. She had discovered that with proper training, dedication, and courage, it was possible to exceed even her own expectations. The mockery and doubt she had faced in the morning seemed like distant memories compared to the respect and recognition she had earned through her actions. The sergeants watched her leave with genuine admiration and a new understanding of the importance of not judging people based on their appearance or background. They had learned that talent and dedication can come in unexpected packages, and that underestimating someone based on age or size can lead to surprising revelations. Emma's perfect shot at 800 yards had not only hit the center of the target, but had also hit the center of an important lesson about respect, capability, and the power of proving oneself through actions rather than words.